today because today I want to start a conversation, and I'm calling today's sermon the starter of a conversation around this. Do we really even need God? And for some people, let me just say, that's not even the question. For a lot of people, the real question is, do we need religion anymore? And for more Americans than ever, they are giving up on or backing away from religion. And the reason they're pulling away from religion and pulling away from God isn't because becoming an atheist or becoming agnostic is so appealing. It's just that many find that religion is unappealing. In fact, more and more people in our culture are saying that religion is now actually the problem. Like, we were brought up to believe that religion has the answers, that religion is actually the solution. But as we look around today, if we're really honest at what's happening in our world, it's easy to come to the conclusion that maybe the truth is that religion is the or part of the problem. Now, something really interesting happened that you may be aware of, you may not be aware of. It happened almost 21 years ago surrounding 9/11. Right after 9/11 happened, when the World Trade Centers came down and the Pentagon was attacked, right after that, there was this initial surge in our country around all things Christian and all things Jewish, basically almost all things religious. That next Sunday, September 16th, 2001, everyone who had not been to church in forever or weren't even sure that they believed in all of that showed up, and churches were packed. I sat in one. This church didn't exist yet. Second Sunday after 9/11, churches still didn't have room. Third Sunday after 9/11, right back to normal. And then something else began to happen that maybe you weren't aware of, but we have all been affected by since. There was this surge, this anti-religious surge that happened in our country, and immediately following 9/11, neuroscientist Sam Harris began writing a book that would eventually be published called The End of Faith. And the subtitle is Religion, Terror, and the Future of Reason. This book was a scathing critique, not of Islam. This was a scathing critique of all religion. He turned it into a publisher, and they denied it. And publisher after publisher after publisher, and no one wanted to touch it. Because the assumption was that right after 9/11, a book that was anti-Christian would not be a book that anyone would want to read. Perhaps if it was just anti-Islam at that time, but not anti-Christian. After over a dozen publishers turned him down, let me tell you what. When a dozen publishers turn your manuscript down, that's got to be depressing. Over a dozen publishers turned down his manuscript, but he finally found one. And when it was published, the book spent 33 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Now, let me just be straight with you. Christians hated this book. In fact, Sam Harris got so much negative response about this book that he published another book, little book, titled Letter to a Christian Nation, that addresses specifically Christianity and Christians, basically saying, you are the problem. The same year that this book came out, Richard Dawkins published his famous book called The God Delusion. In the opening section of his book, Richard Dawkins tells us specifically why he published the book. This was not simply a book about agnosticism or atheism. This book was specifically targeting religion. And here's what he said in one of his opening paragraphs. Listen to this. He said, if this book works as intended, religious leaders who read it, who open it and read it, will be atheists when they put it down. Over 3 million people purchased the book in over 35 different languages. The year after the God Delusion came out, journalist Christopher Hitchens published a book called God Is Not Great. Subtitle, How Religion Poisons Everything. And once again, this was an attack on all religion. It wasn't an argument for agnosticism or atheism. It was just a way to say that religion is the problem. Not a specific religion, just like all religion is the problem. These guys became rock stars. They were on late night TV, college campuses. They were YouTube famous. Their debates were watched over and over and over. They sold millions and millions of books. And what had already begun picked up speed with what so many people were already thinking, that religion is the problem. And while there was not a surge of people becoming atheist or agnostic, so many people disconnected from religion and faith and disconnected from God that it actually created a new category of people. And there was a name that surfaced for this new group of people, and hundreds and thousands of people walked away, and for many reasons, and that's understandable. In fact, you may be familiar with this new group. They are now called the Nuns. Not to be confused with the nuns. The Nuns are non-affiliated. We're just not affiliated. It's not like we've gone and started or joined a new religion. We're not atheists. We don't call ourselves agnostics, but at this point, we just don't know what we are. The Nuns say, hey, we're not really hostile towards religion necessarily. We're just not bought into it. We're just kind of done with that. I'll tell you, the demographics on that are mostly male, mostly left-leaning politically, theologically, either agnostic or apathetic. In other words, they don't know, they don't care, they just don't need it. The Nuns say, hey, we're not hostile towards it necessarily. We're just not bought into it. We're just done with religion. And I'll tell you, it's about 30% of the U.S. population, about 35% of the millennial generation, and about 45% of the Gen Z generation would say, I don't know, I don't care, I just don't need it. And whereas, look, I can't speak on behalf of all religion, I can say this with confidence. The Christians that have migrated into the nun category, it is the church's fault that has happened. It is the people that do what I do. It is the people who gather like we gather. It's our fault. And the reason so many people have migrated away from the church is not because of the message, it is mostly because of the messenger. Because at the end of the day, it is not the nuns' fault that they found Christianity so unengaging and so unappealing and so unscientific and so irrational. It's my fault. It's our fault. And here's why I say that. Because when you open the pages of the Gospels, those 4 historical accounts of the life of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you take a look at Jesus' interaction with people, there is something that will absolutely jump off the pages to you, and it's this, that people who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. Not just the miracle worker Jesus, not just the I fed you Jesus, not just the teacher who taught things that we still can't figure out. There was something about the person of Jesus that was just attractive, and people who were nothing like him actually liked him. And Jesus liked them back. So if our Christianity is not attractive, if our Christianity has no stick to it, no adhesiveness to it, I'm convinced it's because we have the wrong version of Christianity. And the thing that convinces me of this more than anything else, are the deconversion stories that I hear and read about. I mean, for a long time, I've read these stories, and it's fascinating. People who used to be Christians or would say, I grew up in the church, I'm just not a Christian anymore. But as I listen to these types of stories, I think, it's so interesting. It's so heartbreaking and curious. And I typically think to myself as I read or hear these stories, I typically am thinking, wait a minute, the God you're describing, I don't believe in that God either. The original first century version of Christianity never embraced the ideas that so many find offensive. And what you may walk away from are things that the Christian faith should have walked away from a long time ago. So for the next few weeks, I'd like to address that. And let me just tell you, if I had the power, and I don't, but if I had the power, I'd like to try to correct that. Because this is where our world is heading. It is the very reason why we chose this topic to bring to our church at this time, because this is where our world is heading. And we want to be there when they get there. And if you feel the way that I've been describing, or you maybe have a kid that does, I want to spend a few weeks trying to present Christianity to you in a way that maybe it's not been done before, and not because I'm smart or I've discovered something that nobody else has, but because I think Americans have embraced the wrong version of Christianity. It is now the new American standard version of Christianity, and it's not appealing, and in some cases, as we'll discover, it's not even accurate. So to begin the discussion, I want to go as far out on the outer edge as I possibly can of the conversation. And I would like today to begin this conversation, I would like this conversation starter to be an update on agnosticism and atheism, because you need to know. And the reason I want to do this is not because so many people have checked the agnostic box, not because so many people have stepped across the atheism line, but because so many people have stepped towards it. But when you walk away from faith, and when you step away from God without considering what you're stepping towards, oftentimes people find themselves in a situation they never meant to find themselves in. The bottom line is this, and here's what you need to know. You never walk away from something without walking towards something else. And what I want you to get, especially if you consider yourself a nun, or you're considering moving that direction, or maybe you grew up in it and you're thinking, man, I just don't buy this, or maybe you're here and you're going, man, I'm just tired of this and it just seems irrelevant to me. Here's what I want you to get. Atheism is not simply disbelief in God. Agnosticism is not simply, I don't know if there's a God or not. They are actually very complex belief systems that lead to some disturbing conclusions. They are a belief system just like Christianity, just like any other world religion, and they lead to some disturbing conclusions. Now, there's something that's super important that you need to know. Disturbing is not a truth test. In other words, something can be disturbing and still be true at the same time. For example, your teenage daughter's boyfriend. I mean, it's true, he's her boyfriend, but then you met him, and it is disturbing. So something can be true and disturbing at the exact same time. And here's why that's important. Many people have stepped away from religion, and specifically from Christianity, because of some disturbing outcomes or consequences of the Christian faith. But disturbing is not a truth test. Something can absolutely be true and absolutely disturbing at the exact same time. And some of the things we're going to talk about today as it relates to the death of religion are disturbing. So today, let me just tell you, this is not an argument against atheism or agnosticism. In fact, my goal today is not even to try to convince you at all that anything is wrong with that. I'm not trying to convince you of that. All I simply want to do to start this conversation is update you on where our world is today and on what it means to be an atheist or agnostic in the 21st century. And if you choose to walk away, you need to know you can't step away from one thing without stepping toward something else. And so, again, today is not an argument against, nor, let me just promise you up front, today is also not an argument for Christianity. It's not an argument for God today. Today is just we need to think about this. Today is just if you choose to quit religion, if you choose especially to quit God entirely, or run into someone who has, today is to just tell you that simply there's an alternative, and you owe it to yourself to know. So real quickly, I want to kind of give you the 6 beliefs of atheism, and I'm going to toss in agnosticism. And if you're one of those people and you're like, you know what, I've kind of lost interest. I've lost interest in God, I've lost interest in the church, I've lost interest in religion. In fact, I really do believe with Christopher Hitchens that maybe religion actually is the problem. I kind of believe that. But then you look at the alternatives and you're sort of tossing a little bit because you're not sure which way to go and you feel caught in the middle of what to do. You're a nun, and I want you to know that once God is out of the picture, a personal God, a creator God, once he's out of the picture in your life, that what we're going to talk about today is what you're left with. And it may be true even though it's disturbing. But we should know what we're getting ourselves into and what we're stepping towards, and you should know what's happening in our world. So here's what it means in the 21st century to embrace atheism, agnosticism, like 35% of the millennials, 45% of the Gen Z generation have. These 6 things, let me tell you, the first 3 are new maybe to you. Since 9/11 kind of new. The last 3 are the things we all knew or maybe have heard or grew up knowing. So here we go. The first one is this. I'm going to call this first one the illusion of the mind. If there is no God, there is no you. I don't know how to say that any different. That if there is no God, there is no you. We all know what brains are. But the whole idea in this is that the mind sits outside of this tangible thing that we call the mind. The mind is an illusion. This is the first tenet of this. In a world where there's nothing but biology and chemistry and physics, there's no room for the mind. And here's the thing that brought this kind of front and center for me. I've been reading some of Christopher Hitchens' book entitled Mortality, and he passed away in 2011 from esophageal cancer. And so he was dealing with cancer as he wrote this book, and he wrote a lot about his conversations with his doctors. And his doctors kept saying things like, Christopher, your body is fighting. They kept saying, your body is reacting to. Christopher, your body is trying. And they kept referring to his body, his body, his body. And he finally said in his book, he said, I said to my doctors, I don't have a body, I am a body. And when I read that, I had to think, wow, that's really it right there. If there is no God, if everything's chemistry, if everything's biology, driven by the laws of physics, then that's absolutely true. There is no me, I'm just a body. Have you ever tried to live like that? Because I honestly don't think you can, but I tried for a couple hours this week. My kids, just biology. My wife, just biology. All of you, just bodies. My friends, bodies. All our staff, just bodies. All of us, just a bunch of biology. There's no me, there's no you, there's just biology. Man, was that hard. There's just biology. This was so hard. And here's what you already know. You don't want to be treated as biology. You want to be respected as if there is a you in there. So that's just one of the disturbing conclusions that you have to embrace if you decide to take God off the table. the illusion of the mind. Here's the second one, which is the illusion of free will. And this may be a new one to you. In a world that is governed by the laws of physics, there is no room for free will. Everything's predetermined. These are laws, they are going to happen. You may have experienced choosing who you married, but that was just an illusion because every decision you make is already predetermined. Stephen Hawking, who you know is just brilliant, was suffering from ALS, but his mind was just amazing. And he believed in determinism, that everything is already determined. And he said, but it is determined, it doesn't matter. And yet jokingly, he believed in determinism, and yet jokingly he said this: I've noticed that even people who claim that everything is predestined and that we can do nothing to change it, look before they cross the road. That may be true. And I'm not arguing that it's true. I'm not even smart enough to argue with him, but at the end of the day, that's almost unlivable. So if you're going to be an atheist, if you're going to be an agnostic, if you're going to move toward the nuns, if you decide God is not going to be in the picture for you, and you don't know, you are left with a world where freedom of choice is an illusion. So here's the third one, and honestly the most disturbing one to me, which is the illusion of value. Most of us believe value is actually a thing. In fact, we exercise and leverage the idea of value all the time. Not just financial value, but the value of people, or the value of work, or the value of exercise. We attribute value to things. But that's not scientifically possible in a world governed by physics. And yet it's something we leverage and we talk about every single time we have a conversation, including today. But it is an illusion. There is nothing that actually has value. It's just that is my predetermined way of living, that I ascribe value to things. Now, this is really, really a big deal, especially when it comes to justice, which seems to be important to us. Because it means that justice is just what we want it to be. In other words, in a world where there is no God, where there is just physics, chemistry, biology, there is no actual justice. So the moment we reach out of our biology and try to hold another biology accountable to some invisible thing that we can't put in a box, we have just appealed to justice, but it is an illusion. There is no such thing. Justice is just what I want it to be. Here's the fourth one, and now we're talking about something you may have heard of, is that something came from no thing. Right? The big mystery. It is the question, what happened before the Big Bang? And you can't really say what happened before the Big Bang because nothing happened. You can't say what was before because before was like a term of time and there was no time before. So after the Big Bang happened, suddenly there was time, matter, space, and there were laws of nature and laws of physics that govern all that. But before all that, even though you can't use the word before, nobody knows. We're still waiting for somebody to come up with a theory that kind of explains why anything exists. Here's the fifth one. That first life began from no life with no help. And again, look, you studied this in school. You may be studying it right now. And you've heard people talk about this. And because most of us are so far away from that in our daily lives, it actually seems simple to us. So for those of us who don't live in that world, the idea of no life becoming life just seems like a really simple problem. Move on. But it's not, as you know, because the very first life, even the most simple form of life, was extremely complex. And so if you push God out of the picture, you believe whether you can explain it or not, and look, this is not an argument for or against, you believe that the first life emerged from non-life. And if you are a nun, an agnostic, atheist, you just need to know, or if you're considering moving that way, you just need to know that. And then here's the last one, is that natural selection is responsible for all life after first life. All forms of life, every variety that we see, all the varieties that have come and gone through the years, that natural selection is responsible for all that change. Now, look, if you read that book, God Delusion, which is honestly just fascinating, at the end of the book, God Delusion, Richard Dawkins summarizes natural selection. And when I read this, I thought he's kind of making fun of his own view here, but he's trying to bring some life and he's trying to bring some emotion into this sort of lifeless conversation about we're all related to some early life form and something came from nothing. But this is possibly the best description of natural selection that I've ever seen, I've ever read. And this comes straight from Richard Dawkins himself. Here's what he said. He said, think about it. On one planet, and possibly only one planet, in the entire universe, molecules that would normally make nothing more complicated than a chunk of rock gather themselves together into chunks of rock-sized matter of such staggering complexity that they are capable of running. When he says chunks of rock-sized matter, he's talking about us, right? Like us. That they are capable of running, jumping, swimming, flying, seeing, and hearing. He's talking about us. He goes on and he says, he reads it a little further by talking about capturing and eating other such animated chunks of complexity, that we're capable of doing this. Capable, he says, in some cases of thinking and feeling and falling in love with yet other chunks of matter. I know. I read this and I kind of chuckled too. And I thought, are you actually making fun of what you actually think? Of natural selection? No. And look, can I just be honest about this? My degree is in theology. I'm not smart enough to argue this. I'll just own that and admit that. But that is where we are if God is taken out of the equation. In fact, look at how he finishes the statement. He says this, talking about Charles Darwin of evolution. He says, we now understand essentially how the trick is done. That through this invisible force that we refer to as natural selection, the most simplest form of life became every form of life that has ever existed since then up until now, with a lot of forms that are now extinct and we know nothing about. Now again, look, I'm not trying to make an argument for this. It's just an observation. But perhaps that's how we all got here. But every time, I'll just be honest with you, this is personal to me. Every time I read about natural selection, it just feels more and more and more like an invisible personal force with an agenda. Like it can't be stopped and it's moving toward something over millions of years until here we are today. But if there is no God, then I'm just completely mistaken. And there is tons of scientific evidence that suggests that is how we got here. We can't deny that. But the question is not that. The question is did it have any help? Now, look, if you've lost faith in God, or you're losing faith in God, it is more personal than that. Atheism and agnosticism has not become appealing or more appealing. It's that your version, and what we're going to talk about over the next few weeks, your version of God or faith, the faith that maybe you grew up with, has actually lost its appeal at times when compared with what science is telling us, and it appears as if it could actually be real. In other words, you've lost or are losing your faith in God. And I'm going to do my best in the next few weeks, if you'll hang with me, to convince you that the God you're thinking about quitting, the God that you've quit believing in, the God that you are losing faith in, never existed to begin with. And all I'm saying is perhaps your version of your childhood God never grew up with you. And that you walked away, or you are consider walking away, not because you're not smart, or you're not sincere, or you're not even asking the right questions, But perhaps you walked away needlessly because you had the wrong God. And again, I'm not trying to convince you away from atheism or agnosticism or becoming a nun, but simply to shine a light on the alternative. Because if there's not a God, what we've talked about today is what we're left with. But maybe every decision you've made that you felt like was your free choice, maybe it was an illusion. It may be true that you have no value. And neither do your children or your grandchildren, and neither does your work or the people that you love. It's possible that all of this is an illusion, that there's no justice, that this thing that we keep trying to appeal to make things fair or even and to make sure that people are treated correctly, it's possibly that all of that is just an illusion because there is no mind, there is no you, you're just a body. But here's what I know about most of us, is that, man, we hope that's not true. We certainly hope not. But here is what I do know about you, is we hope that there's more than that we are more than that. Because our only hope for that hope is God. So, do we need God? Perhaps we all do. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for our learnings today. God, I hesitate to call it a sermon today, but a conversation starter of where our world is. And Father, you've given us this incredible mission in the world, and sometimes it seems like we can't hit the mark because we don't know where the mark is. So, Father, would you open our hearts to what we're actually supposed to be doing as your followers? And then, God, for those today who have joined us at a campus or joined us online out of curiosity of what this is, God, would you help them to know our authenticity in this? The fact that we don't see ourselves as better. The fact that we recognize and acknowledge and that we trust that they are incredible and intelligent human beings who are also looking at this. And so, Father, help us to honor each other and respect each other as we talk about a very sometimes disturbing topic that's happening right here in our world. And so, Father, would you help us with that? Would you lead us with that? And thank you. Thank you for letting us be in a church where we can talk about something like this and have conversation